Welcome or welcome back, everybody, to another exciting episode of Aaron's Opinion, the podcast for blind people where we speak about critical issues in the blindness community and all other issues from across the universe, galaxy, and even issues down under in Australia. Let's head down there. Decade, you are a friend or an acquaintance, or you at least know of Christy, who we recently interviewed not too long ago here at Aaron's Opinion, and she suggested that I get in touch with Decade. You've had a lot of life experiences. You have a lot of interests. And of course, you are a musician as well. And you very well might be one of the first people that gets interviewed on Christie's podcast. Anyway, though, who is Decade? So why don't you walk through some of the experiences you've had? I understand that, you've had a lot of experiences in life. You've done a lot of different things. So why don't you just walk through your life journey and I will, interject, to help you tell the story. So go right ahead.
Oh, goodness. Where do I start? My goodness gracious. I have got a lot of passions in life. I love being a mum. I'm a foodie. I like to try absolutely anything I can. I basically love, anything that invokes my four senses. Obviously, I've got no sight. So I'm consider myself a small time, I guess, home barista. I love perfumes and teas and aromatherapies and stuff. But the one thing that has stuck with me ever since I could remember has been my love of music and all kinds of music, really, excepting for the mainstream, I guess, in the last, say, 20 years. I have a great feel for a lot of genres. I love anything from, say, 90s techno to classic rock from the 50s to the 90s and rock pop and doo-wop and all kinds of other things. Really, I have a lot of favourite bands. My favourite rock bands include Deep Purple, Status Quo, Led Zeppelin, and also Aussie bands like Skyhooks, The Easy Beats, Sherbet. But I also love bands like The Eagles, Little River Band, and that kind of thing. I have always had a dream of being in a classic rock band and or a group that sings harmonies. I've been in a few rock bands over the last probably 10 years playing around my local area. I'm at the moment in central Victoria. So it's a country country town of Avoca. So I've been playing in bands in the surrounding towns. So Lexington, Bendigo, Denali, Maryborough, Ballarat. Yeah, just the surrounding towns, basically, in a couple of different classic rock bands and also a trio that had two acoustic guitars and bass. I'm the bass player and I sang lead in some songs and a lot of harmonies. I have written not very much of my own material, really. I can co-write, but I find that I write my best stuff when I'm by the beach, which Avoca is nowhere near the beach, unfortunately. So I've got a lot of projects that I sort of haven't really finished in terms of originals, but I've been doing a lot of arrangements of covers, both for my bands and also for my trios. I'm currently in a band, playing bass and singing in a band called the Chovies, which features a lady on banjo who sings, another guy on guitar who also sings, and I sing, of course, with them, and our drummer. So it's a pretty unique band. We describe ourselves as not folk, not rock, not country, not blues, but basically a little bit of everything thrown in. And yeah, I also myself have played many instruments, piano, clarinet, saxophone, trumpet, trombone. I've done some work on piano accordion, and I also have I'm trying to learn some technique on my upright bass as well. So, yeah, I like to pretty much have a go at anything I can, pretty much.
Sounds good to me. And certainly, I absolutely recognize all of the groups that you've mentioned, all the groups that you really enjoy. Absolutely, that's really, really good. So yeah, good, great. So what do you think turns you on to these various groups? In other words, growing up in Australia, how did you come to notice all these various rock groups? Was it common during the 60s, 70s, 80s that these groups were just being played all over Australia? I guess what is the culture? What has been what would you say has been the musical culture of Australia? In other words, over the, no pun intended, decades of your life, how have Australians digested music from the States and other parts of the world? Because we know that Australians love music and certainly love rock. So how do Australian people, approach music during those decades? What was trending or popular during each of the decades?
Well, basically, there has been a lot of change. I grew up in the 90s. So basically back in the 90s and into the early 2000s, and even when I started doing formal gigs in the late noughties and the teens and stuff, a lot of there wasn't really a lot of rock on the radio per se. It was more you had to sort of pick the station if you wanted to listen to rock. But there were a lot of pubs that would have bands playing classic rock music, again, from all my favourite decades, so from the 50s right through to the 90s, especially the biggest hits. Um, and there were a couple of radio stations that um, played a lot of classic hits, as in the softer bands, the Eagles and Little River Band and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and such. But there was one or two stations also that would play the Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple and all that kind of thing. I basically grew up with, like I used to listen to that sort of stuff on the way to school, the classic hits and the hard rock. My mum used to play a lot of hard rock and stuff as well, like a lot of records. I love vinyl records as well. That's my other passion. Um, but it kind of died down there for a while. A lot more a lot more sort of emphasis was on technology and on um, mainstream sort of top 40 stuff of the last, say, 20 years. But rock is really trying to make a comeback. And I'm one of the ones who obviously are trying to keep it alive, really. Um, so yeah, basically my influence was just through my family and my friends mainly, with in terms of, well, all those genres, rock and 90s techno and all kinds of stuff, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It makes a lot of sense. So basically, in growing up in Australia, you would listen to basically whatever was on the radio at the time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. By the way, for some reason, I hope you certainly won't take this the wrong way, but for some reason, Christy gave me the impression that you were a baby boomer.
Well, I'm an I I'm considered an honorary baby boomer among my friends and my family, because I think in a lot of ways old school. Like I like I like music from the baby boom sort of era.
Okay.
I also kind of like the idea of the 50s and the 60s. I like a lot of uh like people used to tell me that, it would all be about social interaction, about family, about not just sitting watching TV, about getting out and doing things and, food was cooked at home and music was produced by real musicians, not so much, except for my 90s techno, I guess, not so much by technology, but everything had a pride in it, a soul in it. And that's the kind of culture, I guess, that I really sort of fit in with. And that's the kind of, that sort of vibe is really what I'm sort of most comfortable in. So,
Got it.
yeah, I'm an honorary baby boomer, as
Very
in
good.
I'm a millennial, but not,
Oh,
not as a millennial, if that
oh,
makes sense.
wait. Okay, well, let's solve this. So what year, well, what year were you born?
1989.
Oh, okay. We're a lot closer in age. Okay. The way you were coming across, that's very interesting. You were coming across as someone who was at least 10 to 15 years older than me. That's interesting. Okay. Perhaps I think it was the way Christy was, the way, okay. Maybe you should tell Christy when you come, when you go to that podcast, you should tell her to, you should let her know that she marketed you in a very colorful way. She marketed you as an old person. So,
Right, okay.
which
Not that I
American,
mind.
well, Australians are very, very overly, I've noticed that the people in your country are very relaxed. You're very, an American woman would be very offended right now, would be all upset and all in a rage and, so no, but I understand. You can say that you appreciate the era of the 1950s and 60s as I do. And basically, in some regards, that's how we live our lives too. I live with my family and my parents are of that generation too. So we kind of live like that too, actually, in a lot of ways. But no, that was definitely the baby boomer era was, well, technically to be overly anal would be anyone born after World War II. So 1946 to roughly 1976 was the boomer. But there's, in America, we have a lot of different labels for it, but you're extremely right. I've noticed, and it's ironic how you actually fit right into what I was speaking about on the show earlier today with someone else. You correctly noted that the music back then was a lot, it seemed to have a lot more meaning or, definitely was a lot more soulful back in that, in those decades for sure. And I think that's why when you turn on your radio or you go to Spotify or YouTube, you can find that there's a lot more covers being done of those songs of the past. So you're very right. It is a very, very interesting matter. Yeah, I like American country. I like reggae. I like music from Western Africa. I like music from basically. I'm kind of all over the place with music. I like a lot of music from the 50s and 60s, and then I like a lot of the stuff from the 90s. Um, I'm curious. This is kind of a fun question to ask really any guest of a podcast decade, but what was the first song that you remember hearing? Now, I know what it was for me, so I'll answer after you answer, but what was your memory of your first song that you ever remembered hearing and knowing what it was called?
Oh, goodness gracious.
I'll be
That was a
interesting if
really
there's, it'll be interesting to see if there was an interception of culture or an intercept of a song, a very, very, very famous song. I want to see if you can figure out what it is. I want to see if you also heard that song first.
right, okay. Well, I've always been conscious of music, but the time when I suppose began to really was really conscious that I'd heard a song, if that makes sense,
Right.
was when I was about 2, and it was I Want to Hold Your Hand by the Beatles.
It's interesting. It's interesting. My first song, because my mother loved it. Now I'm going to preface this by saying that I have glaucoma and I forget what I've told you or haven't told you. So if I'm repeating myself, I'm going to repeat myself. Yeah, get used to it. The fact is I was born with glaucoma and a congenital heart defect. And the first 4 years of my life was spent going back and forth to hospital. And at the time we lived near Washington, D.C. So my first song that I remember, my mother loved it, was Layla, Eric Clapton's Layla, which was the lead song in right around the time I was born. That was one of the main songs that was still very, very, very popular, even then in the 90s. Yeah.
I
Hmm.
take it you mean the acoustic version, yeah? Because that came out, I think, in the 90s.
Whatever version it was, but whatever version was popular, that's the one she liked. So, yeah. Hmm. Yeah. So that was my first memory of a song, was that one. And it's still arguably obviously one of the most famous songs ever. Probably not the most famous, but certainly on the top 100 ever most famous songs. Certainly I don't know. I wonder where it ranks now in the world, but it was still at the time, it was still one of the best songs. Yeah. Interesting, interesting. All right. And then, so what can you tell me about, growing up in Australia? Did you play a lot of instruments growing up? I mean, listening to music is one thing, but did you play a lot of instruments growing up?
Um, a few. Mainly, I started off really on piano and guitar. Um, I had a small nylon string acoustic guitar right from the time I was about, I don't know, two. Um, and I would play piano at kinder oftentimes.
And for
Um,
us, let's pause for the people up over. She meant on up over. I believe we call that kindergarten. You threw it down under. They throw off the suffix. That's interesting. I think you
yeah, well,
meant kindergarten, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes we do say kindergarten, sometimes we say kinder, preschool. It's all kind of relative.
Well, sort of, except the assumption is that so there is a subtle difference. The preschooling is for the really little toddlers that are less than 5 years old. And if you say kinder or kindergarten, the assumption to an American is that you're at least 5 years old, is the assumption. Yeah. So there sort of is
Okay.
a difference. And in the States, the kindergartens are like at public schools, and you're treated like a school student even at that age. So yeah. Anyway, so you started
I,
playing when you were 5. Yeah, that's interesting. Mm-hmm.
no, I actually, it was, just to clarify, in Australia, it's kind of different, especially with me, because I went to the Royal Victorian Institute for the Blind, as it was known then, for my first, 2 or 3 years of preschool, and then into, my first year of, I guess, pre-prep or prep school. Like when I was 5, we call that prep here. Um, so yeah, I'm not familiar with the terms. Do forgive me. But yeah,
But no worries. Sure.
and I grew up when I had small sort of classes at school. So with about, I don't know, maybe anywhere from 5 to 10 students, at least up until first grade. And basically piano and just light percussion, so marimba. I don't know what you call those rhythm sticks over there, like the wooden sticks that you hit together. Just little things like that. And from there, my friends and I used to um, form sort of little bands. So 2 of us might be playing on the homemade or school-made marimba project, and we might have sort of um, another boy playing bongos, and we would write sort of our own compositions and that kind of thing. And then when I graduated and started going to high school, I won a scholarship for music, and I used that on guitar and singing lessons. And in years 8, 9, 10, well, 8 to 12, basically, I studied a lot of different genres, but with an emphasis on soul and blues, and was in a lot of different school bands and that kind of thing. So yeah, I grew up playing mainly piano, guitar, and clarinet in various school orchestras as well. I didn't really become sort of exposed, if you like, to the bass um, or the trumpet really until I grew up. I played trumpet and trombone briefly at school, but I didn't really have a lot of experience with those sort of things. And the same applies to piano, accordion, and upright bass and that kind of thing. It kind of basically expanded as I got older, if that makes sense.
Sure it does. That's interesting. Yeah, in the States, music is introduced. I mean, unless you have parents who pull you into it when you're a small child, music is introduced at a much older age and is introduced much less. It's introduced maybe when you're 10, 11, 12. I've consistently noticed after speaking with you, and with someone that I was speaking with earlier today, that in other countries, it seems like music is taught and emphasized a little bit more at school. But anyway, what can you, we'll swing back to that, of course, but what can you tell us about the Royal Victoria Institute for the Blind? You know, what can you tell us about going to that school? Was it a residential school at the time? What do you remember about the place? Yeah.
Well, I do know that it was a boarding school in the 60s and 70s when it was first established. When I was going to school in the 90s, it wasn't a residential school, but they did have regular programs. So they would go beyond teaching just your English, your maths, your science, your music, all that sort of thing. And they would actually have programs where they would teach things like Braille music notation, and even things like daily living skills, art, as in ceramics and that kind of thing, and even things like mobility, um, interacting in the community, problem solving skills when you're out in public, catching public transport, um, even down to things like your personal hygiene, cleanliness. Basically, a lot of they kind of delved into the skills that um, we would learn at home, but in there was programs that they called support skills, which would be a day program where you'd have about 8 different classes, and there would all be different sort of um, different skills. And then there were residential training programs, which would run for about a week, and they would be basically the same thing. In saying that, they also were a lot better than mainstream schools at catering to the individual needs. So some of us were assessed, like when we were actually going to school there, we were assessed as to our fitness for mainstream school, our ability to take in information, our ability to communicate, our ability to read and write, all that kind of thing. And some of us were sent off to mainstream schools that would integrate with the RVIB school, and others were sort of kept at Burwood, at RVIB school. That was in the suburb of Burwood in Victoria, just to clarify, to learn what we could there. Unfortunately, though, in 2010, that school shut down for good. So, unfortunately, at least here in Australia, most people now are forced into mainstream school and just have to have as much support work as they can. So, yeah, I considered it basically my second home because there's a lot of skills that I learned at school a bit better than at home because they were able to be taught by people who specialised in figuring out how different people learnt, if that makes sense, figuring out the best way to teach people with certain ways of learning.
It does. It makes perfect sense. Do you have any idea why that RVIB school was closed in 2010?
It was basically over the years, the government funding had sort of reduced and they'd gotten to a point where they'd had to sell off and then release some of their properties and stuff like that. And I mean, it started even dwindling probably even before I went to school. Even in the sort of mid noughties, when I went back as a work experience teacher's aide, they'd gone from just taking anybody with blindness and some with other disabilities and some without, right to only taking people with sight and other disabilities. So I think it was basically a government funding problem.
Yeah, sounds like it. Sounds like it. Yeah, up here in the States, I mean, there still are schools for the blind, but you would be right if you thought that they mostly cater to people who are not only blind but have another ability or another disability, however you look at it. So you are right that over time, I think what was starting to happen too was simply that over time people discovered that blind people need to be mainstreamed and that it's sort of not always necessary and perhaps, although it's a stretch, not always appropriate to put blind people into specialized schools like that, you know. I don't know. Do you have any particular opinion? I mean, I'm just curious what your opinion is. Do you think there's ever a reason to have a school for the blind, or do you just believe in strict mainstreaming? What's your like philosophy about it?
Well, basically, I'm to use the common phrase here. I sit on the fence because, on the one hand, I don't like the idea of segregation. Like, to use a simpler example of blindness products, I would much rather use a mainstream device that is capable of being used by somebody who is blind or sighted rather than stand out and use a specifically blindness related product. And that kind of thing makes it easier for blind people to relate, I guess, to sighted people, and sort of more mainstream content, more mainstream concepts, all the rest of the stuff. But in saying that, on the other side of things, um, I don't really like the way often blind people can be left behind in mainstream situations. For instance, a lot of my difficulties were um, when we were to study video texts in English, visual texts, they called them. I found that I was left behind because you had to include things in your essays like the camera angles and how that affected the scene and the lighting and all that kind of thing. And there really wasn't enough support to be able to either change that particular part of the curriculum, which a lot of teachers don't really want to do. They don't want to have to modify the curriculum for one or two or three students. Um, or there just wasn't a way, like there wasn't enough aid support, or there wasn't sort of a way around things. So on the one hand, I like the idea of a school that can cater to different people's needs. Whereas when we're in mainstream, you've got to pretty much follow along with everybody else, otherwise you get left behind. And I think that can be equally as discriminatory. So I guess the key here would be, yes, accommodate the needs of someone's disability and be open-minded about it, not just sweep it under the rug, but at the same time, try to avoid sort of underestimating or kind of segregating, if you like.
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah, because I always kind of felt behind. I always felt left behind no matter what. So I think you did bring up a good point that, you know, you can be mainstreamed all you want, but if you're left behind, then that also causes a problem later on, which, that is accurate. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But I think in the States, I think we're moving further and further away from schools for the blind, and especially after the pandemic, a lot of the schools for the blind had lower and lower enrollments and things like that. So yeah, it is a very interesting thing. Yeah. So what happened after you graduated from high school? What types of things did you do then after your high school, as we would say?
I started to, because I also have a very big interest in crime, both true crime and fictional crime. And I wanted to have a job that would put my senses to good use. So my idea was basically to try and work in a system that I call non-visual forensics. So whether that be being like an extra sort of drug sniffing, or, sort of sniff a dog for want of a better term, or listening and defining sort of tape recordings of events or whatever, anything, any sort of police evidence that's not visual that I would be able to sort of hone my senses. So I started to do a degree in legal studies with a major in crime and criminology, only to find out that I was unable to do it in Australia, because if you're blind here in Australia, and I guess it's similar in the States, though I don't know, we are not, if you're blind, then your evidence is deemed inadmissible, because there's things that we might miss because we can't see and all this sort of thing. So we're not even able to serve on a jury. So then I changed tack, and basically, when I met my partner, Pete, he had a lot of experience in working with a PA, working with a friend who had a recording studio, and funnily enough, he was also in charge of the place where I got my guitar and singing lessons. So I became friends with him over the time, and he became a drummer in my band. This friend, not my partner, but so my partner learned, obviously, that I had wanted to be in bands and that kind of thing. So he started to try to facilitate that. And also he has experience, obviously, as I said, with recording gear. And so over time, we've kind of accumulated some recording gear of our own. And I've recorded both solo works, although I'm not really a comfortable solo musician. I just wanted to do some stuff to get known kind of thing. I've done some solo arrangements of songs, two of which are on YouTube, Bright Eyes by Art Garfunkel and Songbird by Christine McVie. I did my own arrangements, and I've recorded on and off things with various rock bands and stuff. Excuse my son in the background. And I've been recently I've finished a CD with a good friend with 6 songs about trains, with him on guitar, another friend on electric guitar, me on bass, obviously, and singing harmonies, and my normal drummer on drums, as in I've worked with him for a lot of years. And so that kind of thing has been what's inspired the creation of B-Flat Studios. So that's basically where I am.
Absolutely. To circle back to something that you said, I also would think that a legal job in the legal field would be interesting. Sure, it would. It would be an interesting job. And some blind people are able to work in that sector here in the States. To answer your question, yes, blind people are able and do serve on juries in the United States. But to solve your curiosity, I have never served on a jury, and you don't necessarily want to serve on a jury. In the States, a lot of bad stuff can happen to you if you end up on a jury. So that's not necessarily something that you want, especially if it's a high profile case. Anything could happen to you if you end up on a jury. So it's not so good. But yes, blind people do serve on juries in the United States. Is the other question of admissibility of evidence? I mean, that's interesting. I don't really know. I honestly don't know if a blind person gives testimony about a certain situation, if it's admissible or not. The answer is, I don't know, but I think it would depend on the people and on the situation. But that's the States, But no, generally blind people, if they work in the legal field, they can be lawyers or paralegals or judges or things in the administration of a legal field, for sure. Yeah. So, yeah. But I do understand why that would also be an issue in Australian society of deciding admissibility of evidence. That's a very subtle thing. So it's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever think about like law school or being an attorney?
Very briefly, but I had a lot of trouble understanding the sort of complex legal concepts and a lot of the, as we put it, jargon, I guess.
Legalese.
And also, sorry?
Legalese.
Yes. And also, I'm told that I'm a fluent writer, as in letters, formal letters or essays or reflective writing, but I'm really not. I don't really like writing. I actually call essays stressays because it does kind of stress me out, trying to sort of think of how to word things, think of how to write things. And I get the impression that, that kind of job would involve a heck of a lot of writing. So it really wasn't kind of up my alley.
Understandable. Understandable. That's why most people don't become an attorney, because mostly what, mostly, mostly what being an attorney is we say in upovers, mostly it's a pain in the ass is what it is. It's a job that's just a lot of work. Is mostly what it, some of it is very interesting. And certainly if I was an attorney, I would help blind people or help people with disabilities. Now that part's good because you can help people. You can help people who deserve help, but outside of that, it's just a lot of work outside of that, quite frankly. So I understand. Yeah. Well, ironically, you ended up meeting people who were able to help you to get into the music scene a little bit and get your guitar and buy your equipment. So what can you tell us? Because we have a lot, as I think I mentioned, I know a lot of musicians here at the Aaron's Opinion family from all over the world who would love to learn from you about your instrument. So specifically, let's kind of geek out about it. So what brands do you have of instruments, and exactly what do you have in your toolbox or in your backstage there for instruments and musical equipment? Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Well, my instruments are broadly sort of ranged. I've got two Yamaha. Well, one's a digital piano, and one is a 76 note keyboard. I think it's an arranger or something like that. I've also got a Roland keyboard that has sort of different sounds on it. So I use the two different keyboards for different purposes. I also use the Yamaha digital piano for solo sort of musical vibe gigs. So, atmospheric gigs. I also have, a Mexican blacktop Stratocaster, and a Fender Mustang GT 100 modeling amp. I've got probably about 6 or 7 basses, most of them 5-string because that's what I learnt on. My stepson had a 5-string that he wasn't sort of using, and so when one of the bands that my partner sort of was associated with needed a bass player, I kind of started to learn on 5-string, and that's kind of what I've stuck with. So I've got his Ashton bass. I've got 3, I think, Ibanez basses, one of them being fretless, and I did that in lieu at the time of a upright bass because they have quite similar sounds and similar sort of versatile abilities. And just recently, a couple of years ago, I bought a Sandberg, California 5-string bass. And that's extremely versatile as well. That's pretty much my go-to. I have an electronic drum kit, which I can sort of play a couple of basic beats, but I use that really for my rehearsal space, and maybe for recordings at home when my drummer is unable for whatever reason or doesn't want to or whatever, bring a full acoustic kit. I have an upright piano as well. It's a Beal from a 2000. In fact, it has a millennial badge on it. And I've got, I can't remember what kind my trumpet is. I think my clarinet is a Jupiter. And I've got 2 piano accordions. I think they're, I don't know how you pronounce it. Barley. It's not a good look. Barley, something. One is an 80 bass and one is 120 bass note, accordion. And we've got a Yamaha small vocal PA and a Behringer desk, a digital mixer. I think it's called an XR18, and we've got two sets of studio monitors, so we use those for mixing and all that kind of thing. We've also got a couple of Behringer B115 speakers that we use for either front of house at small gigs or as foldback. And I've lost track of the amount of different kinds of microphones that we've got that we sort of try with different sort of vocal tracks or instruments and that from time to time. I've also got a few acoustic guitars. I've got two 12-string. One's a Cork, one's a Hummingbird from the 70s, and a Elector. The other ones are, one is an Ibanez, and they're all steel string, except one. But the Ibanez, I've got an Ibanez and a steel string Valencia as well, and a Fender that doesn't have a pickup. Yeah, I've pretty much named almost everything. There's probably a million things I've forgotten, but yeah, I've got quite an arsenal, if you like.
I think you're ready for prime time. I think you're ready. I think you're ready to go. I think you have enough instruments. I think you're good. You're good. You got a collection there. You're good. So you could have a whole store basically if you wanted to sell that stuff. You could have a whole music store if you gave it up, I guess. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Where did you come to get all these instruments? Were they all bought from the store? Were some of them given? I mean, usually musicians over their lives they collect instruments through either buying them or being gifted or borrowing and then buying. I mean, how did you come to own all of these instruments?
Well, my stepson pretty much gave me on a permanent loan, I guess, his Ashton bass. I then bought a like, I basically got them for different circumstances at different times and now use them for different sort of purposes. So like my Valencia guitar was given to me and so was the Fender, and actually I bought the Fender from a friend, and I bought the Hummingbird from the 70s again from a friend. Two of my Ibanez acoustics I bought because I really liked an Ibanez acoustic that a friend of mine had. So that's why I bought the first one, but I didn't like the pickup on it because it's a electric guitar style pickup on an acoustic guitar and it didn't sound that great. So I bought the other Ibanez. When I bought my Ibanez fretless bass, obviously that's, like I said, because I was looking at playing sort of folky, sort of more melodic stuff and needed an upright style sound but didn't have the money for an upright bass. But my upright bass herself, I bought off a friend. And yeah, the 4-string Ibanez, I bought because I thought there's been so many times where people have asked me to get up on stage and I'm like, oh yeah, but I only know how to play 5-string bass. So I bought that one to keep my skills up. And then when I was using it in a band, just for a rehearsal, as a real-time rehearsal, I loved the sound that I got. So I wanted to buy one, a 5-string version of that bass, which I then did. And then when I became pregnant, I needed something a bit lighter. So that's why I bought the Sandberg. Yeah, it's just all different sort of circumstances that have kind of got me to either inherit or buy my instruments, basically.
Cool, great. No, the other musicians here at Aaron's Opinion, they're gonna love geeking out with you. They're gonna, because although I was a musician for many years, I only played the flute. So I confess that the majority of my knowledge about instrumentation would be the flute. Recognizing different good flutes, bad, less good flutes, different variations of the flute. That would have been my section. But no, you know what you're talking about, though. Certainly. And by the way, if anyone tells you that the accordion is an annoying instrument, I love the accordion. I love the way it sounds. So yeah.
I'm
So what
glad. 'Cause,
so
yeah.
what can you play on the accordion, by the way? Because the accordion's a great instrument. Yeah. Hmm.
I'm not exactly, I can play a couple of basic Irish songs. I'm still trying to get the hang of the coordination, as in being able to do the whole squeeze thing, but also
Hmm.
to try and get my hand from one end of the keyboard to the other while sort of
Maintain
holding on to the big
holding the
sort of.
drone like holding that famous drone like sound, that droning, kind of relentless, kind of piercing accordion sound. Yeah, exactly. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, yeah.
So
It's
basically, I can play Que Sera Sera quite
yes,
fluently, and
yes.
when Irish eyes are smiling. And there was one other Irish song whose name escapes me, but I could probably play it better than.
Do you have Irish heritage, or is it just a common thing to play Irish music, or you just like the music?
Oh well, I do like I Celtic, like Lord of the Dance, River Dance kind of thing. But no, I don't have any Irish blood. It's just a common thing that the first thing I learned on accordion was, well, the first, when I looked for accordion lessons, the first type of pieces that I found really were Irish songs, folk,
Hmm.
Celtic, and yeah, pretty much beer
I can
drinking songs if you
I
like.
can kind of understand that actually, because the accordion in some vague ways has some similarity actually to the pipes, the bagpipes. You know, it's an instrument that is a loud, an accordion, just like the bagpipes, can be both loud and obnoxious kind of at the same time. It kind of has that cringy flavor all at the same time. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, but there's so many great pieces. I mean, I'm a French speaker, so anytime I go to France, I love walking around and hearing accordion players playing all the complex, French music on an accordion. And French music on an accordion is crazy stuff, where they have to practice for years to get it right. There's a lot of really technical stuff that you can do with an accordion. Yeah, I'm.
I'm actually in the process, sorry for cutting you off. I want to learn sway as well. So that, I think that's an Italian sort of romantic song. But yeah, I really want to learn how to play sway fluently.
I
And
know, but the one that I recognize is, of course, K Sarah Sarah.
yeah.
That's a famous one. I'm purely curious if your accordion's around. Do you think you could play the accordion for us to kind of illustrate a little bit?
I wish I could, but because I hadn't sort of planned on it, I would have
That's all
to
right.
kind of get my partner to help me find them.
That's okay. That's quite all right. That's quite all right. No worries for that. But the accordion is a lot of fun. Is it common in Australia for people to take lessons on an accordion? Is that a common thing? Yeah.
Not really. In fact, even in the local area,
Mm-hmm.
whenever we go to open mic nights or concert nights, that kind of thing, it's more focused on guitar, keys, drums. There's not really, at least not where I am, there's not a real sort of call for accordion music.
Mm-hmm.
It's more something that you'd see somebody sort of busking in the street occasionally, like on a market day or something like that. It's not a real commonplace sort of instrument.
I see. I see. Because it definitely goes good. It's an outdoor instrument for being out in the market and entertaining people and things like that. It can be a very interesting thing. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Sure. That's very good. Have you had any interest in picking up new instruments?
Well, I've always wanted, I also like, and the Beatles and Ravi Shankar would be very influential in this. I also love the sound of sitar music, that gentle
Yes.
drone and the relaxing sort of, but also the light sort of drum beat in the background. So I've always wanted to sort of, I've had dreams of learning the sitar. When I was 15, I wrote a guitar piece, which I haven't played for 20 years, so I'd need to work it up again. Um, I, I tune my guitar to open D tuning, and basically I play a piece that's um, modeled, I guess, off Within You Without You from Sergeant Pepper's, and I kind of try and mimic the sort of drone with the guitar while also sort of putting a meaningful melody in that. I like that sort of concept. I've also sort of liked the idea of playing harp over the years and
Mm.
also oboe. I love the oboe and how
Exact,
sort of
precisely,
gentle it is.
precisely, incredibly beautiful. There's several concertos that have been written for flute. Mozart wrote them actually for flute, harp, and orchestra, and those are stunning. If you get a really, really gifted flutist, a really gifted harpist, and a really good orchestra, wow, that's amazing. If you put those three together, because both the harp and the flute have different solos at different points, and then they work together, and the orchestra comes back. I never got to the point in flute music to get to that point where I was playing that, but I almost did, and I almost got to that point, and that's an incredible. Yeah, the harp is the harp is an incredible instrument. Also, too, then the harpsichord also is a fun one and a very interesting and important instrument too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the auto harp is also one I've sort of looked at as well.
What do you mean? What's that
The
one?
auto harp. So it's like um, I can't remember how many strings. I think it's got like 21 or so strings. And you basically, it's used in a lot of sort of country or folk type of music where you play it and it has like a sort of a bright harpsichord sound, but
Mm-hmm.
you hold down a button, I suppose, and play it. It forms a chord with that button, and then you change. You change chords basically by pressing buttons. And I think they're tuned to a certain. They're either tuned to a certain key, or they might have one or two sort of major or minor keys that they can kind of do. I don't exactly know the ins and outs of them, but I've liked the sound and the general idea of them as well.
That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of new age instruments that are being developed, because, and in schooling in Australia, do the children play recorder in the school?
Okay, we used to in the 90s, probably more than
Yeah.
now.
My
I've
generation,
unfortunately,
our generation is basically the same. Yeah. Cause I did too when I was a little guy in the 90s. Yeah.
it's just now, in fact, I would love for my son to sort of have, I mean, I can't tell him what to be and I don't want to, but I would love it if there was more of a musical influence today as like there was back in the 90s and even at RVIB, because I suppose it's a sensory thing. There was even a greater influence on music, more than the mainstream schools, but now it seems to unfortunately be on the decline. So I don't really think that, I think the extent of instruments these days, especially in, primary school, if you like, is your just tambourines, triangles, and sort of small percussion things. It's kind of really gone out of favor. It's quite sad, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, part of the problem is that the huge thing is that the funding, in the school systems is no longer there for the arts. I think this was a problem starting to be a problem before the pandemic, and then once the pandemic rolled around, it just completely kind of really put a damper on that whole thing. But typically, I mean, music is mostly most of the time, music is a hobby for most people, and I think that's how it's seen by most parents is, well, you probably aren't going to have a job in this, so you probably are not going to end up being that good. So it's probably not that much of it. We don't need to emphasize it because it's not a realistic job. I think that's what it is, when in fact, for centuries, people have always played music or always had an enjoyment. In my case, it's podcasting, right? You always have to have a hobby, some artistic thing that you do in your life to connect to the world, So
Mm.
definitely, yeah, yeah.
And I think that was why I didn't, because everyone asks me, well, you seem like you're degree qualified in music tech. Why didn't you do a music degree? Well, that's the kind of reason why, because people kind of look at me and go, well, because playing in bands and producing music, really is, I guess it's a hobby, but it's kind of what I consider my job as well, because, I do get the occasional paid gig. But people look at me and go, oh, well, that must be a cruisy thing. You'd never make money out of that. And so that's why I didn't really want to spend the money, if you like, and try and fight for all the supports and all that kind of thing for something that I was led to believe wouldn't really lead anywhere.
Right, exactly. But it's a great hobby, for sure, for sure. Yeah, yeah, okay, all right. And how did you come to know Christy, by the way, the person that introduced me to you in the first place?
Well, we've actually known each other for quite a number of years. I met her through, she reckons that we've met earlier, but I don't really remember. She said that we met at a residential training program at the RVIB school, but funnily enough, I don't remember that. The first time I really spent a lot of time with her was at here in Australia, we have a National Braille Music Camp, and
Hmm.
basically anyone from Australia and New Zealand sort of get together at Frensham School in New South Wales, which is a boarding school, and we basically do things like we have Braille music classes. The camp forms a choir, and there's usually probably about 150 of us, I'm guessing. Um, and we sort of rehearse pieces that are sort of arranged, if you like. And we
Hmm.
have bands, orchestras, we also get the opportunity to sort of work up our own group or solo pieces. And we have little concerts of a night where we present our material, and the best of those gets kind of nominated to go in the big concert at the end of the camp. So basically, Christy and I met through that, and we just somehow found each other on Facebook, probably, I don't know, when my son was about 6 months old, because I stopped going to camp. I wasn't invited to go for a few years. No idea why, but doesn't matter. And so, yeah, we found each other on Facebook, and we've been chatting and getting closer and closer ever since. Really good mates, basically.
Really sweet, really. But that's very, you say things in a very blunt, a very direct, and a very, very similar to the way I talk, a very endearing and overly blunt way of
Yeah.
the way you like you give out just the right amount of information most of the time, but every once in a while you kind of add in a couple notes that you don't really need in the song. Well, we met at a camp, but yeah, let me tell you, they did never invited me back to that place. Well, that makes me, as the host, that makes me wonder. So were you well behaved? I mean, what did you do to them? You traumatized them? I mean, you didn't tell me that.
No, basically, I didn't realize at the time. Basically, what happens is it's billed as an opportunity for school age children right through from, say, about 5 till when they finish school to have an opportunity to explore their music a bit more and explore their skills and develop new ones, like with Braille music and whatnot. Um, but then once you leave school, um, a select few of us get chosen to stay on as teaching staff at the camp, and at random, well, it seems at random. I don't know how random it is, but basically, I was not selected to return as a teacher. So they basically said, well, you finished school, so you're no longer required here, I guess. And if you do want to return, you have to do, I've heard recently they've introduced an exam where you have to kind of complete the exam and pretty much get 95 to 100% right or pass. Otherwise, you don't get to return. It's quite strict.
I see. I see. That's very, very interesting for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like you have to take an exam to make sure you know enough and things like that. So that is quite interesting. Definitely. Yeah. All right. Well, that's very, very good. So, when you actually go out to gig and play your music, like how many weekends a month can you actually get a consistent gig there in your community in Australia?
Well, it that really depends. We don't tend to get as many in the winter months. So right from sort of May till probably August, September, it's quite quiet. I might get the odd solo sort of atmospheric piano gig, but other than that, it's really when the gigs sort of tend to come when people are sort of more willing to get out, when the weather's a bit finer and fresher and that kind of thing. Sometimes it's not a regular thing, so sometimes I could get one weekend. Just recently, I got 4 different types of gigs in one weekend. Um, Other times it might be one a month, one a fortnight. It really basically depends what's out there, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, that does make sense because in the States, obviously, most people are active during the summer. Um, but there are, in fact, gigs that need to be done all year round. But the majority of that work is done outside in the summer. That is true. Yeah. Or right around the holidays, in the winter. But for that, then they need very good musicians for the holidays. So it's a little bit more competitive at certain times of the year. Yeah. Yeah. That's very fascinating. So, where have you traveled to outside of Australia? You seem very adventurous and very active. Where have you been outside your country?
Well, probably not as many places as I would like to go. I'd love to come over to the States one day, but I've been to my mum's side of the family is Maltese and English, so I've never been to the UK, but I've been to Malta a couple of times with my family, and the first time we actually ventured into Paris, and I also went to New Zealand for the Southern Cross Games, which is basically like a under 18 version of the Paralympics. But that's pretty much it
It's
at
very
this stage.
interesting. Very interesting. And do you speak Maltese?
I can some, but not very fluently, not for lack of wanting to learn, but um, my family um, don't they're not always very forthcoming with like phrases and um, stuff like that to teach me. And um, sometimes I can be a bit of a conspiracy theorist. It feels sometimes like they don't want to teach me because they think that they can sort of talk about me in their language and me not understand. But I actually understand a heck of a lot more than I can speak.
Right, right. Yeah, that's how a lot of people are. I'm bilingual English French and I'm able to do both. I'm able to understand French and then speak back, but a lot of people have a really hard time understanding and speaking. It's two different parts that have to work together. It's very tricky. Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting though. Yeah. And you said you went to Paris, as in are you talking about Paris, France?
Yes, but
Oh.
I don't actually remember a lot about it, unfortunately, because I was only something like two and a half when we
Mm.
sort of went there. So it's a bit too long ago.
Mm-hmm. 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 Right. 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 Good. Good. Okay. Okay. Well, that is very, very, very interesting. And yeah, why don't you expand and tell me a little bit more about the cross games, New Zealand, the Olympic thing in New Zealand, the summer cross games, or yeah, I've never heard of that actually. So tell me more about that.
The Southern Cross Games, basically, I'm not sure if they're always held in New Zealand or not, but I only heard about it pretty much the year that I was invited to go. So basically, they have a few events. So they might have, my particular events were discus, shot put, 1 and 200 meter sprint races, goal ball. Um,
Oh yeah.
I'm not sure um, how many people have heard of that, but yeah, basically pretty much the only real blind ball game that I learnt to play over the years. And basically, yeah, they have like a week of these kind of events for people, I guess, who are still school age. So that's why I said it's kind of like the under 18 version of the Paralympics, but mostly, I suppose, for blind people, really.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Now, have you ever known anyone who's competed in the Paralympics?
Not personally, no.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, many years ago I interviewed one of the American Paralympians. That's why I asked. So, yeah, it's a very interesting thing. Their games were held in Paris, France this year. So that was very, very interesting. Yeah.
Cool as.
Yeah, very good. That's great. Yeah. How far are you from New Zealand, by the way? You're pretty near New Zealand, right?
Um, well, okay, geography is not my strong point. Probably, um, probably a 4 hour flight. And in fact, their time zone, I don't know whether it's 2 hours behind or 2 hours ahead of us. I'm really not good with time zones. And what confuses me is that Victoria is like, we have daylight savings, but not all states in Australia have daylight saving. So, um, we have certain times of the year where we push our clocks forward an hour
Mm-hmm.
and then back an hour when it's
Oh
sort of in the winter
gosh.
months or something like that, just to make things even more confusing. But yeah, I think it's basically a 3 or 4 hour flight from the mainland here, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So that's pretty close, actually, in the greater scheme of things.
As they term it, it's just across the ditch, just across Bass Strait. So
Right.
I don't know exact sort of
Well, to
distances or anything.
An American person would find a 3 hour flight very short. Like this is just a little hop, just a little drive, a little 3 hour drive. That would be very short for an American. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Now it would take you a very long time to get all the way to the States from Australia. That's one of the longest ways you can go. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's really good. So I understand that you don't technically have any of your covers or music on Spotify yet, but are you planning on getting in that direction and getting things up on Spotify? What do you think about that?
Well, to tell you the truth, I'm really guided as to, um, because my partner has a lot more experience on the, right from the engineering right through to the promotion side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just basically go on what he kind of suggests and, like I wouldn't say, um, just because, oh, well, you say, oh, I think I should do this, then we do it. It's just more what he suggests in terms of practicality or popularity or whatever the case might be. So to tell you the truth, I don't actually know whether that is the plan or not, or whether I need to record a few more solo songs before putting them up there. I really just don't quite know. It sounds a bit silly, but that's pretty much the way it is.
No, no, that's not silly at all. No, that's a good answer. You don't know yet. You don't know how much more you'll produce or how easy it will be or things like that. You can be put in touch with the musicians I know and they can certainly give you the knowledge when you're ready to do that if you are. And we have people that are very knowledgeable about how to set that up and what account you need and things like that. So that is all very good. I'm sure that you have a lot of questions about me, Aaron Richmond, and Aaron's opinion, right? So what do you really want to know about me, Decade?
Um, well, basically, I suppose, well, you've told me a lot of interesting things about your background and stuff, but really, how did you find or what got you into podcasting and such a interesting sort of broad range of topics, I guess, as well?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, like I said, when we were talking about the first memories of songs, is that also not only was I listening to music from day one, but I was also being exposed to talk radio. And in the States, we have many, and I'm sure you might have had them there in Australia too, not as many of them, but I was being exposed to talk shows here in the United States. And basically, I was always listening to conversations and always developing the ear for what makes a good interview, and things like that. So that's kind of my background. Is my whole life has been a podcast, and I've just been immersed in audio from day one was audio. And I kept listening and listening and listening. And then I was always an auditory learner, and I got into music, and then I went through uni, went through school, and over time became a bilingual person, and then became a teacher. And all the while I was always listening to talk shows and podcasts and being more aware of them. And then around 2020, I created Aaron's Opinion to give you a voice, to give you a reason and a way to come to my microphone to share your story, because it's important to me that we can share your opinion, Decade's opinion, right? And there's a lot of podcasts around the blindness space, but in my opinion, not all of them are always open. So I want to create an environment where people can feel confident, comfortable, and welcome to come to my microphone and just have a great talk. And I think that the fact that somebody is spending her Saturday afternoon with somebody on the other end of the universe shows that this is apparently very necessary in our society as successful blind people. So not only is it my hobby, not only do I love it and enjoy it and feel better after I record, which I truly do. It's very medicinal for me to help you and to create a great conversation. It's just a positive thing. There's nothing negative about it. It's all about positivity. And I think that alone is a good reason to keep listening and keep recording, because it's always positive. That's why. That's the why.
That's really awesome. You sound a lot like a lad after my own heart. And forgive me, I do call everybody lad and lass, so it's just kind of one of my traits.
That's very sweet. What do you mean there, though? Americans sort of don't use that Aussie vocab. What do you mean? How would you put that in up over vocab? What do you mean?
Well, basically, it's funny. It's not really as common as you might think to say that here. It's more that I've inherited that from...
Well, you said it.
I say it.
You say very interesting things. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I inherited it from, if you like, from my... when I got my first guide dog, I had an instructor from Northern England, and she used to say, "Oh, he's a nice lad," or "Oh, she's a really, really good lass," or, she'd come up to me and say, "How you going today, lass?" And so basically, to me, it became sort of like an endearing sort of trait, an endearing sort of term. If I call someone a nice lad, or "What's that lad doing?" or whatever, I'm saying it sort of, I say it without thinking sometimes, but other times it's more of a kind of endearing conversational thing, if that makes sense.
Okay. So it's like the way we would say, yeah, he's like the way, like maybe in England they would say, "Oh yeah, he's one of my mates. He's a good mate," like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I do say mate and buddy and stuff as well. We do say that here.
No, mate, and I use it too. I say mate a lot of the time too, only because I have a lot of contacts from Europe who grew up with British English. So, and I actually lived in England for 3 months, so I do use occasionally some England vocab, occasionally a little bit. But mate, I say mate is understandable. But lad would be, so the person that would say that in the States, though, would be someone who grew up speaking the ancient languages of that part of the world, where lad would have meant man or boy, I suppose, and lass probably would have meant girl, at least is what we think. But there are people who still speak that ancient language. Even believe it or not, the older generation of Ireland can still speak the ancient language that the Irish people spoke before they spoke English. I actually spoke to someone from Ireland years ago, and she was able to speak to me in the ancient language, and that's where the Irish vocab comes from, their ancient language, which to an American is not even understandable. It's like a totally foreign language. It's quite special and truly spectacular. But that's just me geeking out about languages. I'm a big language acquisition nerd. So anytime someone says, "Oh, I can speak the Gaelic or the Gaelic or the ancient language," I always love hearing them talk. I love hearing ancient languages. Yeah.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah. No, they definitely do. No, if you go into some of those neighborhoods in Ireland with the old folks, the people who are super old, they'll still speak their ancient language amongst themselves. They definitely do. And you might understand some, but in American, to us, it's all just an ancient language. We can't even begin to put sense to it. Yeah.
Yeah, the majority of that's probably the same here, to be honest. Although,
well, I don't know. Probably, yeah. But it depends. There's speaking of French things. You know how in France, have you heard of the province called Brittany in France?
Yes.
Okay. And Brittany, to make a long story short, comes from the people who are called les Bretons, and les Bretons speak Breton, not French. So when I was in France last time, I had a French teacher, and her mother was a Breton. And when the teacher was growing up, she had to learn to speak both Breton and French. And Breton is a Celtic language. So there are some people in France that still speak a Celtic language called Breton, which she spoke it to me. It sounded like a kind of like an old fashioned French like Germanic language is what it sounded like. A very ancient, very exactly what you're thinking, a very old sounding language that is basically so hard to learn that you basically have to be born into that language to actually know it. It's a very unusual language, very bizarre, but it's still spoken. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty cool. There's a lot of people in that part of the world that speak the ancient languages. So yeah. Yeah. Anyway, glad that you asked that. And, it's interesting. I find that I'm having more and more, visibility in your part of the world, in Australia, South Africa, a lot of people in the Southern Hemisphere. Like, seems like Aaron's opinion these days, I'm noticing. Although we have, your story will be shared all over the world. So we have listeners on all the continents, but mainly we have a lot of people, mostly in the United States, Australia, South Africa, Asia, parts of Asia, some parts of the island, Latin America, a little bit here and there, Middle East here and there, a lot of countries in Africa, some places in Europe. Europe is a little bit less. Seems like less people listen from Europe, it seems, but which is sort of surprising in a sense. But yeah,
Yeah, very interesting.
yeah. How certain content gets pushed around in certain parts of the world. Any other final questions as we come up towards the end here? Do you have any other huge questions you've been dying to ask?
Um, the trouble with me is I often don't think of things on the spot. So, knowing me, I'll probably think of something later on, but it's been really informative, and I've absolutely loved the wide sort of range of stuff that both of us have kind of shared. It's been really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Decade, apart from, you did a magnificent job. And of course, I wish you all the success in the world with you continuing your hobby for music and your passion for that, and just have fun with it. Get out there, gig on the weekends, whether you make a quid or not. Get out there, just enjoy it. It's a great hobby. It's a great way to meet people, great way to talk, or just something. Hey, if nothing else, at least it gets you out of the house, right? Something to
Well,
keep you active, and that's a great thing. Yeah.
if I might just say really quickly
You
that
might, sure.
I feel, sorry,
Go right ahead.
I feel pretty much the same way about gigging and even production as what you do about podcasting. I can definitely relate to, I suppose, reaching, I call it, I suppose, touching the souls of other people, um, meeting, like you say, meeting new people, socializing, but also just the feeling of knowing that I'm sort of reaching other people in a positive way. I'm touching them. I like to do, I suppose, or try to emulate what my idols, my musical idols, I guess, have done for me over the years, really. So that's why I say it's in my blood, because music and gigging and even production and looking at the final sort of result of my work, it all comes from the heart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is I could not have asked for a better episode. You did a magnificent job, and just, it all comes from the heart. That's a great way. It's a perfect way to end a perfect and another entertaining, informative, and just another great conversation all the way from down under. All right. So, Decade, if someone wants to get in touch with you, apart from clicking the description, which, yes, you send a beautiful description, apart from clicking that description, how can you be reached?
Um, Mainly, well, like I said, I've only really got Facebook at this stage. Um,
How are you with WhatsApp, by the way? Are you getting caught up with that? Because we do most of the Aaron's Opinion guests privately. We use we use WhatsApp to communicate all over the world, by the way.
well, it's funny you should say that, because when I first sort of got into bands, we used to communicate via WhatsApp, but back then I didn't really find it hugely accessible. So it's something that I'll have to probably
Oh,
investigate in the
it's perfect.
future.
It's perfect now. It's incredible now. It's incredible. So there's a group. So I'll send you, after we hang up here a little later, I'll send you to my private group for the guests. And then there's also a public group, which is basically a WhatsApp community, and you should definitely join both. But I'll send you those links and you can investigate it. But trust me, it's accessible, very accessible and very easy to communicate with all the members who are in there. Yeah, absolutely. All
Awesome.
right. Yeah. All right. Well, very good. Well, It all comes from the heart, as you would say. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful way to end. Decade, thank you for joining us today. I wish you a wonderful weekend. Please have a safe and healthy and happy rest of your afternoon down under. And I hope that you're going to go play some great music and spend some time with Pete and your son and your family. And I just wish you a wonderful day. If nothing else, have a wonderful day down under. And we will certainly communicate on Messenger and WhatsApp when you're able. All right?
Awesome. And thank you so much and
Forever welcome.
for that and for having me. It's been an honor.
Well, you're just a great person. It's been an honor to record with such an appreciative guest. So thank you so much. All right then. Well, we will leave it here, and great episode, and we'll connect over on Messenger and WhatsApp soon. So until next time, everybody, thank you, Decade, and thank you everyone for downloading and listening today. We will be back soon. As we say here at Aaron's Opinion, take care and see you next time. Help one person today. Help 1 million people tomorrow.